We're going to introduce you first. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. It's being live
We are
streamed.
live now. We are live.
Right. Shall we begin, Nanda?
Yes, please start.
Good evening, everyone. I bring warm greetings from the Council of Architecture. And today we are honored to have Stephen Holl with us. It's a landmark event for us. And I'm sure the fraternity will be enriched by his thoughts, by his presentation and the discussion that he's having with Durganand Balsawar. And I want to formally thank Stephen for accepting our invite and taking time out and being with us. And warm greetings from India, Indian Architectural Fraternity, and the Council of Architecture. A brief introduction of the Council. Stephen, Council of Architecture is a statutory authority constituted under the Architects Act 1972 by the Parliament of India. And Council is empowered to regulate architectural education as well as architectural profession. And we are now reaching out to our fraternity through this platform, COA Social, where we have a vertical which we call dialogues, and we have book reads. And we have reached to our audience in a large way through these platforms in these difficult times, wherein we are all locked up in our houses and we can't go out. And a positive approach from all of us to reach out to our fraternity to enrich their knowledge, to enrich their thoughts as well with people like you. And thank you once again for accepting our invite. And I'm sure the COA social platform goes to another level by your presence today. And we're looking forward for an intense discussion with Durganand Balsawar. Over to you, Durganand, to carry forward. Thank you, Stephen, once again for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Mr. Habib Khan and the Council for the support for this series. Welcome, everyone. We are honored to have today a very special guest with us today, architect Stephen Holl. Thank you, Stephen, for joining us today. Stephen Holl is one of the few internationally respected architects who has inspired many of us with his ideas on ecology and a concept-driven design. Through his extensive writings, his paintings, the famous 5x7 watercolors, which we hope to see today, some of them, an extensive study of models that are at some time going to find a place in the archive, and we hope we can visit the archive sometime later, and the manifestation of his projects as an experiential built reality. We are glad to have participants for Stephen's talk, surprisingly, from across Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, South Africa, India, and greetings to all. This is the 10th talk of the series. And before we begin, I would like to place on record our special thanks to Professor Kenneth Frampton and Jose Obreri for the introductions and their profound insights before this program. Our thanks to Professor B.V. Doshi too for the support he has given us through this time. The theme of Stephen's talk today is most appropriate in the present context: air, light, and green space post-COVID. The integration of air, light, and green space has consistently motivated Stephen Holl's work. During a period of global pandemic, the need to carefully consider these aspects of the built environment is greater than ever before. This lecture by Stephen focuses on past projects by Stephen Holl architects that hold potential lessons for a post-COVID architecture, such as the embrace of green space, landscape, maximizing fresh air and natural light, the facilitation of open circulation with social spaces, and ecological integration and innovation. As for architect Stephen Holl himself, he of course needs no introduction, but I nonetheless will do the formalities. He was born in 1947 in Bremerton, Washington, graduated from the University of Washington to pursue architecture studies in Rome in the 70s, and in 76 joined the Architectural Association in London and established Stephen Holl Architects in New York City a long time ago. One of the most innovative and influential architects of our contemporary times, with projects across the world, from New York and Washington, D.C. to China, from Bogota and Texas to Japan. Stephen is recognized for his ability to blend space and light, the ecological integration of landscapes, a deep understanding of energy cycles with a great contextual sensitivity, and to utilize these unique qualities of each project to create a concept-driven design. We're happy that Stephen Holl could join us today. Please join us in welcoming our special guest, architect Stephen Holl. And I'd like to place on record his enormous support to the restoration of the IIM Ahmedabad campus and the dormitories designed by Louis Kahn in collaboration with Professor Doshi. So please join us again in welcoming our special guest, architect Stephen Holl. Stephen, it's yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I have first a slide, thanks to Doshi, who took me on amazing tours of Ahmedabad. And I also visited the Chandigarh sites during the March 2015 when I was last in India. And I must say, I was very inspired by the architecture. And I'm really happy that we're getting the attention we need to these great monuments that everyone can enjoy in the future. My talk is really about 5 points: embracing green landscape space, maximizing fresh air and natural light, open circulation and social space, outside simulcast, distance seating, and ecological integration. I call it post-COVID, but in a certain sense, it's what I've been working on my whole life. I've always felt the importance of air, light, and green space. In fact, my ecological first effort, this lecture, by the way, has been given how many times? Like 10 times, and I keep changing it for each venue. So I made it special for India today. I have the Indian project, but I began on this kind of lecture effort to anchor ecological meaning in architecture back in 2001, 20 years ago, with a series of lectures on pro-Kyoto. That was when our president at that time rejected the Kyoto Protocol. So I went on the warpath and I formed my lectures around these ecological imperatives. But the beginning of that lecture also has a theoretical anchor, and that is thinking about architecture and new architecture. Colin Rowe made a table many years ago where he put down classic architecture in one column and modern architecture in another column. I added my own column called the 21st century. So for Colin Rowe, classic was absolute and modern was relative. And I say the 21st century, it's interactive. For Colin Rowe, classic was fixed, modern was stable, 21st century is dynamic. Classic is physical, metaphysical, modern is physical, real, 21st century is virtual, real. Classic is space and time, modern is space-time, 21st century is space-time information. I won't read all of these, but you can get the point that we're in a time we have to think differently and creatively about the future. So embracing green natural landscape. I want to start in more detail on this first project. I'm going to show several projects in this talk, but this one I want to show in more detail because it just opened. It's fresh on a campus, and it's a campus that was built over a long period of time in America. It's the Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and they had an old brick building. They wanted to double the size of the arts building, and I had a very good client. And when we did the interview, I thought about Benjamin Franklin, that famous moment when he was flying his kite in the rain at night, and there was lightning, and he just was discovering how electricity works. The other character is Marshall, who was a lawyer. So I said this building should be about the light and the heavy. And then they hired us, even from this sketch. That was a long interview process. And then I had a further elaboration, which is much more intelligent, and that is that these gigantic trees, some of them are 4 feet in diameter, and they're the oldest thing on the campus, that those trees would have an impact on the shape of this building. I had to double the size of a building that was on that site already, but we didn't remove any trees, and we allowed this building to actually take the concave and convex shapes of the trees around it. So these are kind of my little watercolor sketches that the people in charge approved of. In fact, the president, when he saw that sketch about the trees, he said, "Brilliant, let's build it." So it was a great client. And there you can see the drawing studio, woodworking studio, design studio, and painting studio, an auditorium for cinema. They teach cinema there. This is the School of Art, and then other parts of the college will use these buildings. And there's a common space in the center that everybody shares. It's built kind of like a box kite on a concrete base, and then the trusses up above are very lightweight and open. And the roof was done by local labor, the Amish, a very kind of interesting group of people, like the Quakers, live nearby in Pennsylvania. It's Amish country. They still drive horse and buggies and dress in black. They don't believe in using electricity. But anyway, they came to put the roof in. So the whole roof was done by local Amish contractors. And there you see building quickly going up like a frame, like a box kite, and there it's finished. That's just terrazzo ground concrete. There's glass between the two concrete base pieces because there's a park in the distance. So there was a Buchanan Park that opens on one side to the Arts Quad and the other side to Buchanan Park. And there you see the exposed structure and the exposed wood by the Amish builders. And there you see the feeling of the trees changing the geometry of this building. And that's a water retention pond. It's a lower end of campus. So I worked with the campus physical planning department, and I said, instead of dumping this water into the storm sewer of Lancaster, let's retain it and use it as a green recycling situation. So this water then becomes a reflecting pond for the project. In 2007, the opening of the Nelson Atkins Museum was a long process of a competition. There you see the original 1933 building. I went we were competing against Tadawando, Christian Potsampano. There were like 6 architects competing. And I went to see the collection, which has a very amazing Asian collection. And this dates from the 11th century. And I thought about the merging of landscape and architecture as the central theme. So the idea, instead of building on the back of the building or on the side of the building, that the building, this new series of lenses merges with the landscape and creates sculpture gardens. So you see the big block in the middle, 1933 building. We didn't touch it except for at the base of the columns on the north side. And the building is then merging with the landscape. It's only in 2 levels, the service level below and the gallery level above, and the lenses that bring the light down. And a great collection of Noguchi. So one of the ideas was to integrate the landscape outside with the Noguchi piece on the inside. There you see the final installation of one of the Noguchi sculptures. And it's a great place for social gatherings. This is before COVID, but you can imagine social distancing working fairly well in a great space like this outside. There you see the old original 1933 building and our new entrance pavilion, the lens number 1. Everything is connected below ground, But then we, one of the reasons we won the competition, all the other competitors built obediently up on the north side of the building. And we said, you shouldn't do that. You should go into the landscape. A similar approach was taken when we entered the competition for the Kennedy Center. That was in 2012. There were 5 architects, Diller Scofidio, Paycobb Fried, Richard Meyer, adding on a building that was done by Edward Durrell Stone and opened in 1972. And we said you shouldn't add directly onto the side of the building. You should, in fact, make a landscape, a new public space with this. This is a very important project, maybe my most difficult one that I've ever done in my life. You see the Jefferson Memorial, you can see it from here, and the Lincoln Memorial, you can see it from here, and it's the end of the mall. And this is a living memorial for JFK. Kennedy meant a lot to me in my life. I remember the day he was inaugurated, and who could forget the day that he was assassinated? A very important president, and it was a very important project. And we made most of this, the program was for rehearsal space. The stage had to be the same size as the stage in the Opera House, very large. So, and then dance rehearsal studios, a lot of pragmatics that had to be accommodated. But then we accommodated them below, and then we punctured the landscape with 3 pavilions: an entrance pavilion, glissando pavilion, and a river pavilion. So you can see here the whole landscape then becomes a kind of monument to Kennedy. 35 ginkgo trees for his presidency, and the ginkgo tree is a very famous because in the month of November, the golden yellow leaves form and they drop almost on the day, on the 20th in Washington, D.C., because of the climate, almost on the 22nd of November, the day he was assassinated. Mysterious trees. They're the ancient, one of the most ancient trees. I wish I had a photograph. I should have had that in this slide. Now you can see here how the program is accommodated below grade, and these different pavilions come up. There's the river pavilion. Now you can see the river in the distance, the Potomac. There you see the Lincoln Memorial, and you can see here on the right the glissando pavilion has a big wall for simulcast projection. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. There's my daughter walking around one of the reflecting pools at the opening, which was 2 years ago. 2 years ago. Boy, this COVID thing has caused us all to forget a whole year, in a way, 2 years ago. There, this was an event that happened before COVID, but there's really a lot of events that have happened after COVID. There you have, a performance, the doors of the river pavilion open, and everyone socially distanced or with their families in the landscape. And that was fall 2020. And, this has been constantly active during this whole terrible COVID period, because it has great outdoor space, great green space, great light and air. And even in winter, there was snowboarding down the slope of the landscape. So it's been a very active place. And there was the Kennedy Awards, June 6th, just a week ago. And because of COVID, they couldn't have them in the big opera house. The performances were outside. So it was terrific. People called me up, sent me emails. Stephen, is that your project on television? I said, yep, I'm very proud of that. Maximize fresh air and natural light. So this is a project I will hope someday will go forward. It was a competition we won for the City Museum North Wing expansion. We were against, Zaha Hadid, Oma, Paycobb Fried. And I had a simple idea, really. I said, let's just take the geometry of the site boundary and extrude it into 3 levels of volume. That's the shape. So they had a funny shape. The site that you could build on had a funny shape. And then let's subtract for light and air. So I'm subtracting maybe a third of the whole volume. So the new addition was a kind of subtractive architecture. And the idea really comes from what I believe is the most amazing architecture in India, and that is the stepwells. The stepwells are a brilliant subtractive architecture. And you can see the original building on the right. And I did get a chance to visit a couple of stepwells when I was there, but one thing I want to do sometime in my life is to visit and document, or at least see. I know there's a lot of ongoing documentation now, because I think some of these stepwells are some of the most amazing subtractive architecture on the planet. And there was also a big ecological aspect. Matthias Schuler and we proposed underwater photovoltaic cells in this pool that connects the existing building and the new building. And Matthias did all the calculations for those. That would have been in 2014, if we would have been able to go forward, that would have been one of the first applications of underwater photovoltaics. One of the things about putting them underwater is they are cooled and they're kept free of dust, and that makes them much more efficient. And then you can see all these energy ideas. That's all Matthias Schuler from TransSolar. There you see a section of the new building and the existing building. This would be a place for education for school children. Education and art, I think, is incredibly important. Today, we have new universities being built, and I was in one, and I forget the name of it, giving a talk with Doshi when I was in India, and they didn't have any art programs. I think this is really, humanity is about art and science, not just science. So that's why I feel this is a very important project. Art education, enormously important. It's the spiritual side of humanity. Here you can see the photovoltaic pool and the trees that we proposed, the existing trees to save, and the lobby. This is all about subtraction and bringing light into the space and light into the gallery space. And then right at the top on the roof, there was a big monsoon collection pool that would be a perfect place for outdoor opening events. This is a project in Bogota, Colombia, also a project that we want to build. We've been working on this project for 11 years now. All the working drawings are finished. I gave this lecture in Bogota to try to convince them to go forward. It's a political problem at the chancellor level at the university, but it's ready to go. So, and it's a perfect example of light and air and green space. The whole building is based on a concept of inside out. In Bogota, because of the high elevation, it never gets to be more than 70 degrees. It's a kind of constant, beautiful climate. You really don't need air conditioning or heating. So that was a perfect example of fresh air everywhere and inside out and upside down. And that was the concept. So that led us to a lot of study models, which I still love today, where you work about the idea of a kind of planar inversion, where there's an inside and there's an outside, and they reverse each other. And there you can see the classrooms, the conference rooms. They are all accessed on outdoor corridors with windows that open, and that big garden that's the heart and center, a quadrangle, a campus quadrangle, that's the center of this project. And also that it has gray water recycling, PV cells that provide all the electricity, natural ventilation to every part of the building. And that outside, I'm going to talk about that in my last section here about outdoor projection. So from that large open loggia, which is the main entrance, you see also the cafe, which is suspended above in the distance. And both of these embrace that central quadrangle. A project that I'm very proud of, maybe this is my first project of any consequence. It's the void space, hinge space housing in Fukuoka. And I'm proud to say today it was almost awarded the 25-year award from the AIA as a great building, but the pyramid at the Louvre got it instead. But I got right up to the end because everybody loves it. It's still working very well. And the whole idea was that all the access to these apartments was outside. Everything had fresh air. Water gardens divide them. So it's the void space that defines the project. And there you can just see every one of these 30 apartments is different. And I won't go into the detail, but you can see the water gardens that divide them. And all there you can see like a Chinese block. They fit together. Some of them are duplex, some of them are integrated across the hall. And they're all accessed by outside corridors. You see one of the corridors with fresh air and light on the right-hand side. And this is under construction. It's the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton. This is next door to where Albert Einstein did his last work for the last 8 years of his life. He worked here at the IAS. And you remember, I always remember Einstein for his brilliant science, but don't forget, he played the violin. So the idea of art and science together. So this is a really artistic commons building that David Rubenstein is giving. And it was a competition against Oma and Todd Williams and Billy Tsen, a number of different architects. And our simple concept was that it should stand for the intertwining of nature, science, mathematics, humanities, and the arts, the intertwining of all these aspects. So even though you would think they're dedicated to science, they really like this idea that the building would be a kind of weave. You see, there's 4 water gardens. So, and you can walk what I call the scholar's path from east to west. The parking is on the east. So you can walk into the main campus building through this building. And therefore also the notion of light. It has a series of curved roofs that bring in natural light in different ways. And one of the things I noticed, I said to the director, I said, all your buildings, all your recent buildings, the modern ones, they all have flat roofs, dead flat. The library is a kind of completely flat roof. And I said, I want to bring light in. I want these roofs to have, and then he said, oh, thought bubbles. He called them thought bubbles. There you can see how the intertwining of these water gardens, there's a place in the building where you're walking through and you can see both the water garden on each side. That was from the competition. And there's the finished plans, a large conference room, 2,000 square feet, cafe, a lounge, medium-sized conference rooms. Their program was, quite elaborate and extensive. It's not a big building, but most of it is on the one level, and there's the cafe from the bar looking out to the water garden on the east. By the way, the entrance is called Einstein Drive. So when you're entering in the future, there's the full building with the Campanile, the original building. That's Einstein's office actually in the foreground. But when you're entering now this campus, you'll see the Commons building. Open circulation and social space. This is a visual arts building at the University of Iowa, which we completed in 2016. And it was all the different layers of art. And it was a large building. And the site was very deep, 300 feet on a side. And I struggled with this because when we first started, they had a much more generous site, and it was easier to make, green landscape and light and air to all the areas. And slowly, they shrunk the site, giving me only a footprint 300 feet on a side, and it had to be several levels to get the 140,000 square feet of program in it. So I started with this diagram, basically another subtractive project. I'm just thinking about it in the context of the India project, but it's basically a subtractive project where I cut this square and I call it multiple centers of light. And there's another drawing that's missing, but there's a laminar shift that occurs. You can see that it isn't a straight cut, that the whole building has a kind of laminar shift. Those two principles together are what form the architecture. There you can see all the different studios, painting studio, graphic studio, woodworking studio, printmaking studio. And you can see here that these cuts also have terraces because there's a laminar shift in the floor plates that allow these cuts to be very animated. And you can walk through the building one end to the other. And that's actually how you enter the campus, this University of Iowa campus, 30,000 students, quite a large campus. And the dormitory site is on the uphill side. And you can walk down this slope and go out the other door. So you can pass by the exhibitions of the art department. So in a way, it's also bringing art to the forefront as you move through the movement on the campus. There you see one of those multiple centers of light and how they become social condensers, because there's a place of terraces, of letting the light and air in, but also a place to stop that's not a classroom, and to be on your computer or to just take a moment off, and then those pause places. So there's 7 of those. And you can see that this building in the foreground is a building that we realized in 2007. And I struggled really hard about doing this new building because I thought at first it should be core 10 like our original building. Anyway, I went through something like 30 designs. Do we have that little video? We don't have that in this. Anyway, in another lecture, you will see I show how hard it is to have an idea that drives the design. I had 30 different schemes to get to this design, but that's not the point of this lecture. This is a Maggie's Cancer Care Center. We opened that in London. Actually, it was opened on my birthday, December 9th, 2017. We opened this on my 70th birthday in London. And it's about making architecture something that has a healing dimension to it. And, Charles Jenks, bless his soul, initiated those Maggie centers. There's something like 11 of them now. They're around the world by, relatively famous architects. But the point is that architecture has a healing property. And that's a social dimension. You go here, it's a place of gathering for people that have terminal cancer, and they have a tea party, they have books of the library, they have meetings, they have counselors. The idea of the building, which is on a 5x7, is a inner layer that's like a comforting bamboo, natural bamboo, a structural layer that's like a hand, a concrete, and then an outer layer, which is a musical analogy. This is next to St. Bart's Cathedral, one of the oldest in the center of London. In fact, it goes back so many years that it precedes musical notation. And the monks did a thing called neumes, musical notation of neumes. So I took that as a kind of, let's say, point of departure to bring light and color. And I made the outer curtain wall into a kind of staff. And then we did small drawings of color that would be inserted in the new kind of stained glass called Ocolux. It's a material that we developed with the Ocolux company. So this kind of complication could be, furthered in a different way. And it was an experiment, and it worked really, really well. You can see there the bamboo interior. You arrive at a garden at the top, the staff of steel, of Arup did the engineering. It was very difficult, this curved staff. But there you see the inside where the colored Ocalux Noom notations glow from outside light, glowing on the inside. And there's the natural bamboo. And at night, it reverses itself. During the day, you really can't see the color from the outside. It's a very neutral building. This is, by the way, this is a deeply historic section of London. That's a 1715 building on the left. There was many effort to block our project because of this, but I made the case that the coins of this building, there was another building here that was a brick box and from 1960, and we removed it. And I made the case that the coins at the edges of this building hadn't been seen in 50 years, and they would be revealed when we turned the corner with our curves around the Maggies. Anyway, after something like 60 presentations, we got approval to build it. And you can see here that it glows like a beacon at night. On a rainy November night, this thing is kind of glowing and the colors are glowing. It's a very inviting, there's doors on either side. It's a very inviting social space. This is a library we realized in 2019. You can see a lot of developer condominium towers in the background. There's more in the works. I wanted this building to be a public statement. It's a public community library, so we made it vertical instead of horizontal. And when we made it vertical, we saved the gardens for the public, and we gave a view to Manhattan to all the users in the building. You can see here also the kind of central idea of the problem of a library today, and that is the digital versus the book. Some of my students making libraries, they're so excited to say we have a bookless library. Okay. I don't think the book will ever die. And I think this whole digital versus the book silliness has kind of played itself out. But anyway, this drawing was from 2010, 11 years ago, at the height. I've been teaching at Columbia for many years. And at the height, and we actually gave a library problem, or another studio did. And anyway, I wanted to balance this question. So there are books. When you're looking here at your entrance, there's books on the face, and then there's computer desks behind it. So they're working on their computers on these different levels, but they're looking at books. And we kept the ground free. The building could have been done as a one-story building, but it would have covered the whole site. So then you wouldn't have this reading garden. And that's a state parks building that forms the edge of that garden on the north. And the cuts in the building, that's a structural facade. So the cuts echo the movement on the west side, that movement going up and looking to Manhattan. And on the east side, they tell you about the three parts of the program: the children's library, the teens library, and the adults library, which have to be acoustically separated. And so when you're looking at the building, you're looking at a concrete structure that's just got aluminum stain on it. There's no curtain wall, and there are no columns in the building. So the building has, it's about the tectonics of architecture as well. And there you see that main view perpendicular to that stair to Manhattan, and the notion of the books and a large meeting room below. And here's the children's library. Also, you can see the Empire State Building on the right there in the distance. Even the children get to have this spectacular view, and they can learn about, you can see the United Nations building from here, and you can see Louis Kahn's Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial from here. And that's just natural plywood. On the ceilings, it's acoustically perforated to deaden the sound. The children can be very loud and screamy. I have a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old, so I know that. And acoustics is very important. And at night, you have a kind of glow. And there you see the relation of the condo towers in the back. And by the way, there was a developer who proposed to give the library for free 3 floors in the bottom of one of these condo skyscrapers. And a congressman by the name of Jimmy Van Brenner said, no, we want a public building that has an expression as architecture. So here's a case where a congressman, not an architect, has the foresight to understand that developers cannot drive our world today, which is happening. I mean, you look at Hudson Yards, what a terrible project. Developers are driving our world. We can't allow that to happen. And here's a congressman that said, no, our community library should have a presence as a public building, not the bottom floors of one of these condo towers. And so I'm very grateful to Jimmy Van Brenner for his love of architecture and understanding to get this project realized. This is a school of art in Houston. It was part of a competition. Glasshouse School of Art. It opened in 2018. This was a competition against a number of architects, and then they boiled it down to 3, and they gave them each a certain amount of money to develop it. I think it was Snohetta I was against, and Morphosis. And the charge to all of them was that the building on the right, the one that says 7 Gardens, was a parking lot for an existing church. And you had to remove those cars and put them in a 7-story parking garage before you can build on that parking lot. And there was another building here in the foreground, which I'm sorry, we should have had. That was called the Glasshouse School, but it was only 40,000 square feet. So I took a big chance. I told them, I believe you should look into the distant future of what you want to do here. You should take the chance and double the size of your school. Make it, instead of 40,000, 80,000. By the way, education was the first mission of your art museum. I know it's very big now. I think it's second to the Museum of Modern Art, and they're very full of themselves in terms of, collecting art and paying a lot of money for it. They just bought an Anish Kapoor and installed it in front. But anyway, I said you wouldn't build a 7-story parking garage then, because you could put the parking all underneath and connect it by tunnels to the new building. Anyway, we won. So that meant that we would have a whole campus here. You see the museum on the right, you see the Glacial on the left, and the extension of the sculpture garden, almost doubling its size. And so this was built first because we had to get the layer of parking underneath so they could, there you see the church in the distance, so they could free up that site. And here it's all made out of precast concrete, and that are structural elements that hold the floors up. It's a simple L with a wonderful open forum in the middle of it. And these are sculpture studios, painting studios, classrooms. And there's that forum, that open forum that forms a space of unpredictable use. We've had weddings there already. There's a rap artist that does his rap music on those steps. I should have had a piece of that in this lecture, but I mean, that's another lecture. And there's the straight structure, that's all the natural concrete that's holding up the floors, and each one has an operable window. You see that square? That means every studio has operable windows. And I had to fight to the death for those operable windows. In Houston, they say, oh, we all use air conditioning here. We don't need windows. I said, look, this is an art school. Those art students may not be using air conditioning in the fall and the spring. They need fresh air. It's a psychological thing. They need to be able to open a window. Anyway, it was a long battle, but I won. And now everybody's very happy, because at COVID time, everybody wants to open the windows on both sides of the building and let the air blow through the building. And I really think that's a basic principle of architecture, and it should be supported no matter what. And it shouldn't be forgotten. There's the whole master plan. So we offered them, instead of just a pavilion, that the kinder building, an entire master plan that unifies. This is on the right-hand side, there is the only Mies van der Rohe building, a museum, the only Mies van der Rohe museum in America. Of course, he did the great one in Berlin, but this one is curved because of the street. So our building curves in response to his. And this is the Kinder building that just opened 6 months ago. And the idea of this building was to bring that Texas light in. Like I thought of the clouds that seem so high in Texas because the sky seems so big. And I imagine them pushing down on the roof of the building, forming a luminous canopy that the light would sneak in around the curves of those clouds pushing down. And then, because we've done over 10 museums, I understand that the circulation inside of a museum is the primary aspect. You should not have any dead end spaces. You know, the people who've done the Museum of Modern Art don't understand this because it's not very good circulation. This building has no dead end spaces. And you can see the red line here, how you can move and how you can close a gallery for installation and not interrupt the possibility of visiting the building, because you have another way of moving around it. And every area has natural light, and you can see this sort of gardens, the 7 gardens that punctuate the building, giving it a kind of a break. And there's a complicated section. And the tunnels that connect the parking and connect the Glassell School, that are very beautiful sculptural elements. Then they had become art installations. And this is an installation by Olafur Eliasson. And there's the main central space. They had a gigantic Calder mobile, which they never told me about. But luckily, it works here very, very well. And the natural light is working great. And that sort of luminous canopy of the spaces. And you can tell the person has a mask, so you can tell this is COVID time when they opened the building. And that's that luminous canopy bringing the natural light. And all the walls are orthogonal in deference to the art. So let's say the geometry and the interest is in the sky. And at the street level, we saved all those great live oaks, so systemic to Houston. And this is a sculpture gallery at street level to entice you to come into the building. And the entire building is enclosed in what I call a cold jacket. That was a competition idea, that this sunlight in Houston is enormous, and I could open the tops of these tubes, 30 inches in diameter. I could open the tops and open the bottoms, and when the sunlight hits the wall, by the chimney effect, it will reduce the solar gain by 90%. But also, it would be a glowing thing at night and bringing light into the second floor during the day. So it's all about light and air. These tubes are all about light and air. And luckily, there was a company in China that could make them. And they really have a magical appearance at night, and they change with the different days, the sunlight and the different day. But I'm very happy to always feel that this is doing something special in Houston, and that is reducing the solar gain by 90%. And that building becomes a kind of glowing beacon at night. And there you see the Mies van der Rohe building on the right. Outside simulcast, distant seating, and auditorium. I think the pandemic, we didn't see it coming, but we had already proposed an outside simulcast on our building in the Kennedy Center. This allows also that people can see the opera going on. Instead of paying $250 a seat, they see it for free. So I'm very proud of that. I think that is a very democratic offering to the public. I mean, the people who can pay $250 a seat inside, that's fine. They'll see the full thing in the flesh. But at the same moment, a simulcast, not a recording, but a simulcast, the public can come for free and see the opera or whatever it is that's going to go on there. And I think JFK would be very proud of that democratic offering. And we do a similar thing now at the Bogota doctorate building. In that great loggia on the outside, we propose a simulcast, and we open up the seating and make it less dense. Ecological integration, that's something I've been doing with all my projects over the years, whether it's the first in the linked hybrid in Beijing, which we opened in 2019. It's a piece of a city. It has residents, it has shops, it has education, it has offices, it has cinema. There's a chunk of the city that allows you to live and work and recreate in one place. And it's the largest geothermal installation in China at the time. 660 geothermal wells, 100 meters deep. Nothing like that had ever been tried. All recycled water in the ponds. And I'm happy to say this thing is functioning perfectly. So it's heating and cooling 740 apartments. There you see the gray water treatment, which it was quite easy to do. I mean, it's a plumbing to integrate all the gray water in a big project like this. But once you make this decision, the client called Modern Green did, the treatment was basically an ultraviolet zapping system. And there's no smell. This water is absolutely amazing. I thought, there might be a problem. I'd never done a gray water treatment at this scale, but it works perfectly. Water is a kind of limited resource on our planet. All the water that was on the earth, that was ever on the earth, is still here, and that's all we have. So we have to think about water in the future as a kind of precious commodity. So I'm very proud of this gray water pond pools that they can ice skate on in the wintertime, and they do. And it's a public space. So the ducks love it, the children love it. We have lily pads and lotus blossoms growing. There's the Cinematheque that we proposed. The bridges have programs in them. That's for another lecture. This is a project I designed in 2006, an ecological dense pack on the edge of the Aegean Sea. And the housing collapse of 2008 killed the project, but just a month ago, it came alive again. That's a funny thing about being an architect. Now that I've been practicing for 40 years more, sometimes a project that you did 10 years ago suddenly comes back alive. And this is happening right now in about 4 different sites. One in Helsinki, I'm not going to show you, and then this one in Turkey. And this site is near Melitos. There's the Aegean Sea. And Melitos is the oldest gridded city in Western history. It's an amazing place. Nothing's left of it, of course. I went to Datum. There's a lot of ruins there, but there's not much left at Melitos. But the idea of the grid, the idea of a dense pack, that became my way of how can I preserve the landscape, do a maximum ecological project, and get this many houses on it. So it was the idea of dense pack, maximize natural landscape, and 0 ecological footprint. There you see this 2006. That's when that sketch came. And these are the different types. There are 3 different types of housing. And then we worked with Matthias Schuler, the one that did the Beijing linked hybrid, and he had many ways to get a net zero with using the seawater, desalination, closed loop technical water. And we developed every house. All the working drawings of the project are finished. Every house has natural ventilation, natural shading, and this all had to be done. This was in 2006 throughout the day to reduce the sun and the glare. And we used all local materials. So we want to have local labor, and we use local stone, and then a kind of ash concrete and local craftsman built wood sunscreens. And then in 2010, there was a terrible earthquake in Haiti, And I thought to do a pro bono project to house these people that were displaced. I mean, million people were displaced in the 2010 earthquake. And I thought to use the principle of this dense pack. And actually, I actually had the foresight to understand that, and this is what happened. I was just looking at it. In the main towns like Port-au-Prince, they couldn't rebuild on the sites because of the political manipulations, eminent domain, and all this. The only thing you could do was build on a new site. So I said, let's make a site on the sea, and they would have views like that project in their book. They would have views, and they would be south facing. And I would do the first one, Stephen Holl Architects, and then my friend Tom Main would do another dense pack. David Adjay would do another dense pack. I got them to agree. And at that point, I didn't have architect D, architect E, or architect F yet. But you get the principle. The principle is to dense pack, to get net zero. And all those principles could be reformed. And then we had solar thermal desalination. Matthias Schuler was heading up that part of it. All the electricity was provided by the photovoltaics on the roof, an integrated system. And we had solar cooking, and we had gray water treatment and compost toilets. So we didn't have the political will. So once we finished it, we made a pamphlet, we tried. But I think the politics is always the issue. Anyway, we were maximizing the local labor with the windows and doors. The structure was in recycled concrete. The skin would be painted colors and interiors by the inhabitants. So they would be, in a way, they would be given individuation by the inhabitants. And I don't know if you've seen photographs of Haiti, but bright colors are common on the houses. And I'm sorry, we don't have that image in that. We didn't put it in here. And I missed that one image. But anyway, that's the talk for today. And it's 11 o'clock. That was a perfect 1 hour. So I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Stephen, for that fascinating presentation. And thank you for the message to young architects here in India and Southeast Asia to almost rediscover a new ecological balance. I think that's the underlying statement of the talk. So if we may begin, there are about 5 questions. I'll keep them short. I had them a little longer, but I've shortened them. Landscape seems to be taking on a completely new role in all these projects, in the manner in which we inhabit them. And at one point, you even mentioned that the Kennedy Center was all locked, the buildings were locked, and yet it was a very lively living space, because of the landscape and being
That's
the
right.
largest roof.
That's right.
And that redefinition of the landscape, the outside simulcast, and so how would you really, if you were to elaborate this idea of speaking to young architects on what is the new potential of the void, not of the built form? We've been so
right. Absolutely.
focused on the built form.
Very good question. Very good question. And I was educated as a landscape architect. I worked for Lawrence Halprin, one of the great landscape architects on the West Coast. When I graduated from the University of Washington in 1971, I went to San Francisco. I tried to work for MLTW. I couldn't go to, they weren't hiring, but I did get hired at Lawrence Halprin, and I worked as a landscape architect.
Wow.
And, to me, and also my teacher was the great Richard Haag in the University of Washington, that taught us landscape as a kind of first principle to understand the site. He said, whatever you're going to do a project, go to the place and be the site.
Wow.
So that's pretty easy to remember. Be the site, and so landscape to me is the way you, I mean, when you're thinking about a project, you think about the voids first. So I've always done that. And I think now when I make this lecture, light, air, and green space, it's sort of, it gets obvious that how important this will be, and it should be in the future, and rightly so.
Absolutely. The second question that I would have, and you may answer parts of it, or you may even leave out some part of it. I'm just provoking a question here. There is this underlying theme that you had of the ground as a datum. So under the ground, in the ground, on the ground, and over the ground. So if we see the Franklin Marshall, it really hovers and floats.
Right.
The horizontal skyscraper also floats,
Right.
and when you see the neoclassical building, I think at Nelson Atkins,
Right.
go below ground, and
Right.
so there is a conscious engagement with the datum of the ground,
Right.
and which is not only experiential but also ecological. The two seem combined. Could you kind of, and I know it's linked to a child, I read somewhere it's linked to a childhood memory, and if you could
Right.
reveal that memory to us and how childhood plays out as, this amazing thing of the ground.
When I was about 7 years old, my brother, who's a year younger than me, and I would play in the backyard, and we used to play what we called property. We were making roads and little buildings. But as we grew a little bit older and had some tools, we built clubhouses.
Oh.
And we had a 2-story clubhouse, and then we had a clubhouse in the tree. And then at another time, and at the same time, actually, the one existed on the ground, and then there was one above the ground. And then we dug a big hole and we put logs over it and an old carpet and put dirt on top. So we had under the ground, in the ground, on the ground, and over the ground. And it's really funny because I remembered it many years later when I was teaching first year at Columbia, and I said, I made a lecture. I said, there's only 4 types of architecture. There's under the ground, there's in the ground, there's on the ground, and there's over the ground. And I gave that lecture with a little diagram. And I began to remember that that's how I started as a 7-year-old. So maybe I was destined to be an architect about the earth, about the relationships of the earth. And but yeah, it's a principle that I think. Also, I must say, and I love Lebbeus Woods. He was my friend until his death in 2012. But he was about anti-gravity, so I just put him in over the ground.
Fabulous. Coming to the spatial idea, the projects at Bogota, Marshall, Franklin, there seems to be a notion now underlying that it's about air, light, ventilation, and circulation, which again appear ecological. They are, of course, ecological, but they seem to unite a kind of community gathering. The spaces, your circulation spaces, these large volumes in the Franklin Center, these huge doors, that really just open out. And if there are disparate functions, they seem to unite. So how do you see that this freedom of the pavilion, if one could call it, in the 3 pavilions at the Kennedy Center, there's a new kind of freedom that is being explored through the fragment. They're all fragments and yet they have a certain freedom. How would you qualify that in terms of their expression?
Well, I think both in the case of the Kennedy Center, the landscape, the ground, and what's happening below the ground and what's happening above the ground. The ground plane, the landscape is also a social gathering space.
Absolutely.
It's a primary aspect of solving the nature of the problem of adding, when you got the program for a project like that, there were a lot of, rehearsal rooms that have to be exactly this size. I'm sorry I didn't show a proper plan in the talk, but it's like, it was a very, let's say, like a grocery list. You have to have a stage that's 50 feet by 100 feet. I mean, so by introducing the concept of the landscape as primary, and then under the ground, and then these pavilions that come above that bring the light and air, but also orientation, one isn't, let's say, hamstrung by those sizes of the program pieces. They don't then form whatever is the architecture, which I think what most people, they get a program and then it kills the chance to do architecture. Lucan, I remember one statement. He said, the program is just so many bananas. It's what you bring as an architect to the project that counts. And that's the spiritual aspect and dimensions that count. So I feel that the idea that drives the design and the way that landscape in one case is working, or light coming down from above is working in another one, that's very important.
Amazing. Thank you. If one could, since you brought in Lucan, if one could look at the Hunter's Point Library, because it kind of very gently looks over the FDR Memorial, by Lucan. Right. It connects to Manhattan. It connects to, and so while it situates itself, and I think the fact that New York, if I'm right, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. New York really had a program to invite celebrated architects to create these kind of institutions. It was a 10-year program or something of that kind, in which the Hunters Point Library was one of the programs, on the Queens. And somehow it felt that set of condominiums really needed a soul. Was that a thought, that this library sitting pristinely on that landscape, not occupying the landscape, going vertical to resonate with the spirit of New York, and also tectonic at one time, that is just a structural form, and the openings kind of reveal the sections, the teen, the adult, and the sections, and the openings also reveal the kind of movement. And so it's a very, as Frampton would call it, a very tectonic form, where there's a relationship of structure, light, and function, and yet becomes a kind of a soul and a holding point to all these otherwise conventional condominiums. Was that a thought process, or how did it really work?
When I first got the assignment to do this project, I drew a triangle, and I'm sorry, we have to remember to put that in the lecture. There's a triangle of the city that connects the FDR Memorial and the UN building by Oscar Niemeyer and Le Corbusier and this site. It's almost a perfect triangle.
Absolutely.
Across the water. And I thought, wow, what an incredible site. Because when you're in the library, you can see Lucan, the FDR Memorial, which is a fantastic project. And you see the Secretariat, you see the UN building, which amazing history of New York architecture culture. The story of, there's a film about Le Corbusier and Oscar Niemeyer. I knew Oscar Niemeyer because I had a Brazilian wife once. Anyway, I met him 3 or 4 times, and he gave me drawings that he did. But that scheme is really Oscar Niemeyer's scheme. And there's a film by Peter Rosen that shows the truth, that the role that Oscar Niemeyer played with Le Corbusier in realizing the United Nations. And it's a touching thing, because Niemeyer was so young, he backed off fighting whatever, and but the building is very important in the urban frame. I believe it's as important as the Empire State Building or the Chrysler Building, because it stands for something. The belief in the United Nations, that to me is the most important thinking that we need to come back to today, that we are all global citizens, that the earth is one ecological system, that we have to be, someone says, are you an American architect? I said, no, I'm a global citizen. I'm not they say, oh, you seem like you're a European educated American architect. I said, I consider myself a global citizen, and I think we all are. And that's why, actually, I'm so honored to be able to speak to India, because It's the second largest population on the planet. I mean, I've been working in China with real ecological success. I have to say, they've been very receptive. The projects that I'm realizing there are, they're examples of what you can do for the future in an optimistic way. It's amazing. We have the technology. We can do really interesting things in the future, but we need the will, the political will. And I found it on several sites and in several instances in China. And I'd love to have the chance to do something in India. I'd love to build that museum. But, the thing is, we're all global citizens now. I did a project in Biarritz, and I learned something, because in Biarritz, it's a museum of the surf and the ocean. And they were going to have exhibits to talk about the ocean and the health. And the mayor there, who chose our project, he said, the fishermen and the surfers know that the ocean is in danger today. We need to bring that knowledge to the public. So I started to work. There wasn't going to be just surfing exhibits in this. There were going to be ecological exhibits. And I started to work on the exhibits. And I realized for the first time that every ocean on this planet is connected to every other ocean. The water is moving. And it takes almost 1,000 years from one side of the planet to the other, these subcurrents and these laminar flows, these complicated, and if you look at these ocean movement of water, that's the biggest example that the Earth is a global organism and the humanity is part of it. And that's how we have to change. Post-COVID means we got to change. We can't just go back to normal, back to every day. It's a wake-up call for us, and we should come to the future with the optimism that we are an organism and we can build that way. Anyway.
Wonderful. Since you brought in this notion of India being one of the epicenters now because of the population and the size, I'd like to stretch the imagination a little and overlap it with your early phase. We've been observing your trajectory from the 80s to now. And I think you had also made a statement that in your earlier days, you were a rationalist, a very strong rationalist. And that's the time we were also into morphology and typology in Ahmedabad, etc. And there was this whole notion of, and then this whole experiential idea that began to emerge in your projects. Was there a transformative movement? Was it gradual? How did you negotiate these two dialects? How did you negotiate?
Well, in my personal story I was trying to find an American equivalent of the rationalists, the Italian rationalists, that I could find American typologies and morphologies and use that as a kind of building block. But I was feeling that's very limited thinking. And at that time, there was a conference in Banff that I was invited to, and we were invited to ride a train from Vancouver to Banff, which is a transcontinental Canadian railway. And on that overnight train trip, there's a thing called the spiral tunnel where the train goes in on one side of this and it has to go in a spiral to get out to the elevation on the other side. Anyway, I was seated next to a philosopher who was a specialist in Merleau-Ponty, who I've never heard of in 1984. And all night long, we were talking about Merleau-Ponty and how these principles of phenomenology could apply to architecture. And I was thinking, wow, that's so much more open in terms of thinking than where I was. So I often say that in 1984, I went through a transformation in that spiral tunnel. When I came in on the east side, I was trying to be an Italian rationalist, but when I came out the other side, it was much more opened up. But that doesn't mean that the principles of learning about typology are wrong. That's, learning about typology in the history, I think is fundamental to any architectural education. But I think, especially in the future, we need to be more open in terms of what we might think that we can do.
Absolutely. If I can, because you brought up this in the just two more questions. So you brought up this issue of the digital and the real book. One is ephemeral, one is virtual, and the other is really embodied. We experience it. A common question, which is generally said, is that, I mean, I think your Rubinstein and even the Bogota projects are not built, but the images look more real than real, if one could
That's,
call it that.
we're all suffering. Let's say there's no way out.
Yeah,
That's what's going to happen.
yeah,
But I think that we have to remember that's not the way to begin a project. Nowadays in developer world, these architects that are kind of obedient, they'll whip up a very realistic image of some kind of building that has no idea about the section or the plan or the meaning of the building. So in a way, that's a danger. But I just want to say the digital is a superpowering thing. It can be a great benefit to architects. I think it's a tool. It's transformed our field. There's no doubt. However, the beginning of a project, to have a soul and a spirit, has to start with the mind and the hand. And one of the things I would say, once you have an idea that drives a design, it can have a kind of spirit. And one of the things that the human brain can do that the computer cannot, the way a computer works is it cannot access deep memory simultaneous to the processes that it's going through on the boards. We have enormous power to do computational things and organizations, kind of amazing. Okay. And that's going to go on with AI. I mean, we're doing a project working with AI with these people at iCarbonX. But the principle of creativity happens when you can access deep memory instantly. And that's what the mind can do that a computer will never be able to do. So, I mean, I think that's why the creative analog beginning is so important. And we'll all use the tools. There's no denying it. I remember, when the fax machine first came, I was running my office on a fax machine because we were doing a project in Japan, and you could fax the stuff in at 6 o'clock at night and they would get it in the morning. And I realized that if you were going in the future to be an architect, if you wanted to have two offices, you should put them on the opposite sides of the earth, because you're 12 hours difference. That means you can do 6 months work in 3 months, because the two teams can work on cycles. And that was my principle why I started an office in Beijing. I mean, I had to, because the project was under construction. But I said, aha, perfect, 12-hour difference. I don't need another office. I have the basic, and that's a principle about the digital power that we're using today to be creative with it. So I'm not against any of the tools, but I'm totally convinced that the analog beginning is necessary.
Brilliant. And if one takes it from there, I think there's a question from Japan. Could Stephen Holl reveal to us some parts of his design process? The idea, the watercolor sketch, the iterative process with real models beside the digital, the full-size mock that happens. Could you just describe why is one?
These are all tactile dimensions. I mean, the full-size mock-up is necessary to understand the materiality, the reflectivity, the coming together of different materials, the glossiness, the sort of the quality of the supplier. Every building that we build, we do a full-size mock-up fragment on the ground. Very important. That's never going to go away. I mean, Renzo Piano does that. Sure. That's important, and therefore, when I do models, sometimes I like to build the study model in the kind of materiality that we might be exploring. But right now, of course, we have a gigantic 3D printer, and that prints out models, overnight. So I use that too. I mean, I use that. And then when we come towards a solution, I might ask for a larger model in different materials. But to me, that's the joy of architecture. I mean, I don't get any joy out of digital rendering at all. Not at all. In fact, because there's a kind of company in China called Ding Dong, they do our digital renderings overnight. Why would I, get a joy in that? I mean, it's something you just nowadays you have to do it, but it's not the end all, and it's deceiving. So we have to be careful. The idea needs to have a heart and a spirit, and the materiality, the end materiality of a project has a tectonic reality, and that's important.
Amazing. Stephen, there's a large number of young architects today watching the show, and we know that some of your most seminal projects have come through competitions.
Yes.
Even Chiasma, and I think Chiasma was a turning point in
Right.
your life, and were the Gazelle, and they've come through competitions, and where most often you've had the courage to even redefine the program. It's not listening to the competition as is given.
And those are the ones we won, by the way.
Absolutely.
The disobedience is important for an architect.
Brilliant. So how do
Many
you see
times.
the
Listen,
role
I got to show you something.
Yeah.
I was just making a list of all the competitions that we've done. Okay. And we're just on our way to the 160th architectural competition.
Wow. Congratulations.
But listen to this. Samuel Beckett said that failure is a principle that an artist has to absorb and realize. It's a principle. Failure. Fail again, fail better. I can't quote him, but 160 competitions, and we won less than 5, in the average. Let's see, there's a number here at the bottom. 34 wins, okay, in 160 competitions. So look at all the failure. There's a heck of a lot more failure than there is win. And you got to be able to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and try it again. Enjoy it. Now, I actually enjoy competitions. Why? Because it's a place of experiment. I don't try to win. And that's probably why we've won some of them. We try to do the best possible solution, and not necessarily be obedient to whatever they're asking for.
Absolutely. So coming
I think
to
that's an exciting thing about being a young architect today, because you don't need a big office to do a competition. You can do it with 2 people, and then you can farm out the rendering, and you can look just like KPF or anybody else, because they're all using Ding Dong in China to do the rendering. So have the idea. That's the key. So suddenly it levels the playing field in a way. We're in a competition. We're just entering a competition right now against 2 firms that have 300 people. We're 33 people, okay, in 2 places, and I never want to be bigger than that. I limit the size, but nobody's going to know that we're only 33 people, because the renderings are going to look just like that 300-person office. So, you could say that this moment that we're living in is a potential for young architects in a certain way. And I think that this moment is open. Architecture can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to be from architecture per se. It can be inspired by music, by painting, by sculpture. It has a lot of potential. And I also believe that young people that are in school, they want something that reflects an optimism about the future. That's why the first project I showed at the Franklin and Marshall campus, they don't have any modern buildings on that campus. The last building they had built before mine was a dormitory by Robert A.M. Stern with neoclassical columns, and total postmodern building, which nobody really cared for, but it's all right. But when we did this building, the students get very excited, because this is a building that's optimistic about the future. And I think that's the message. I think it's a positive one.
So, Stephen, the last two questions before we close.
Wait a minute. You already had your last two questions.
No, okay, these are the
It's
real
11. One more question.
Okay, one more question. And then you close. I request you, after the question, close with your memories of visiting India. So the last question, because we talked of competitions, and I've heard you speak about the fact that the unbuilt idea to you is as much architecture as the built, And
Right.
I'd had a long conversation for over about 10, 15 years with Lebes on this, who was a strong believer that the idea and the expression of the idea, even as a drawing, is architecture. But I remember that when it moved towards the light pavilion and the project of slice porosity, which really facilitated that it could be built, it finished after Lebes's death. But what do you have to say about this idea and the experienced reality? Where does it stand?
Well, Lebbeus and I agreed about that point. In fact, there's a Michael Blackwood film about me and Lebbeus having a conversation. I think it's in 2012. I believe it's the year that he died, in fact. Anyway, it's an hour-long film that you can find on YouTube. But we agreed about the idea as central and driving the design and having a way of anchoring meaning in architecture. And I also agree with Lebbeus that the building doesn't have to be built. I think that Raymond Abraham was also a proponent of that in the architecture world of culture, like even in the world of music, you can have a great piece of music and it's already great, and maybe it can never be played. In fact, I built a house in Korea based on a piece of music by Istvan Anhalt that had never been played because it required 200 participant orchestra. It could never be orchestrated. So we built his score as a house with 55 skylights, and his widow saw it online, and she sent me this letter. She said, I was shocked that my husband's piece from 1965 inspired a work of architecture, and it's built. It's a piece that was never played in his lifetime. So that's the power of an idea. That's what I think is important. And I don't know. I think that with that in mind, by the way, these competitions or whatever it is you do as a young architect, you can never be discouraged because you're being creative and you have a creative, a model, a creative object. I'm here in my archive. There's 3,000 square feet of models. You see, I don't know if I can turn this over there, if you can see.
Wow.
So this is, maybe 3/4 of those models are of unbuilt projects that were never built, but they're there. They're like unplayed musical scores, and it's fine. And I think the joy of architecture comes out of the creativity.
Fabulous. Stephen, so
And anyway, and sort of, I would have said this about India. I still want to build that museum in Mumbai. So if someone knows anybody in any possible governmental position, I'm ready to work. We have the drawings, we have the models. Tasneem is the director. She would love to see it realized. Why can't we break the political blockage and do it? It's a place of education, for young people. Then I will definitely be on get back to Mumbai, which and do some more traveling. There's a lot of cities that I want to see, and I would love to see the stepwells that remain, and I think those are worth fighting for. They're amazing subtractive architecture. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Very grateful for this, and let's be in touch. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Hour and a half.